And you've just heard Catch Me from the EP of the same name by Jazz the Glass. And I'm delighted to be joined by David, aka Jazz the Glass now. Hello, David.
Hi, Alistair. How you doing?
I'm well. I'm so pleased to have you on the show because over the past year, I've become a big fan of your stuff.
Yeah, you've played, you've played stuff on the show, you've put things on playlists, and you've been very kind. So I greatly appreciate your support. It's been terrific. Thank you.
I wasn't fishing for thanks there, but thank you very much.
No, but they're due.
But so I'm pleased to talk to you. Give us some background into yourself as a musician and then Jazz the Glass.
Okay, so I've been making music for some considerable time. I was involved in a release way back in 1984. Prior to that, I have a kind of, my music background is in brass bands, which was kind of interesting. So I played to a pretty good standard with my dad in a brass band. We played quite a lot of avant-garde type stuff, which was yeah, I played some really interesting music. And then I went to uni and the whole new wave punk thing was kicking off, and was going to gigs. I met up with a guy he was originally from Scotland, who I was at Leicester, and we got together and we got involved in the band and put some singles out. Then I did some stuff in a couple of singles in the 90s, and then kind of fast forwarding to 2020, I just was looking back and thinking, I've done a lot of music, but I haven't actually got a lot of stuff out there. Right. So I kind of came up with this moniker of Jazz the Glass and started working on, I set myself this kind of very restricted palette, which I think is quite a lot of artists do there, because I was spending a lot of time working on demos and ideas and kind of getting into the detail of it and losing some of the energy behind it. So I had an Instagram account, and the way that Instagram was set up, if you put stuff up longer than 60 seconds, it went to IGTV. So anyone who watched it would then have to click on it if they wanted to listen to like 2 or 3 minutes. So I had this thing in my mind that I'm just going to write stuff for 60 seconds. That's going to be my frame. And for a period of time, I was posting every week little 60-second tracks. And those are the tracks that I then developed, some of them, not others, that went on to the album Shine. And all of the stuff that I've been putting out in some shape or form probably existed in a 60-second format at some point.
And you mentioned the album Shine there, which came out last year. And you're right, a lot of the tracks on it are quite short. I think the longest is maybe there's a 5-minute one or something, but on the whole, there's 1 or 2 minutes. How difficult was it to put the album together?
It was kind of easier than I thought, because I had a lot to choose. I had a lot of things that I could. There was a lot of tracks there, and in terms of the kind of things that I write, some of them are quite beat driven. They're much more. They're kind of slightly heavier, and then there's the slower, maybe trip hoppy, slightly more soundscapey sort of soul, more kind of emotive type tracks. And I had 10 or 12 of those, and some of them quite quickly developed into 2 or 3 minute tracks. I think because I'm using a lot of samples, it didn't really lend itself to like tracks of 4 or 5 minutes. So it came together much more quickly and coherently, I think. Well, as I listen to it, it feels like those tracks kind of feel like they kind of belong to one another in some shape or form, kind of pretty quickly, I think, actually.
You're right. I think listening back to it again this week, it feels like they all belong with each other, and the reason I asked the question is because you've also had out singles and EPs, and each of them seems to have their own identity. Is that something that you were aware of and were keen to do?
Yeah, I think other people say there is a bit of a Jazz the Glass sound. There are certain things that appear on a lot of the tracks. The upbeat stuff tends to be, like I say, it's quite house influenced. It's got that kind of 120 beats per minute going on. It's got that 4 on the floor bass drum. It's quite, it's either got a funk type bass or it's got a more electronic drive to it. I don't know. I suppose when I listen to them, they don't feel radically different to me. But I can see that there's quite a difference between maybe the down tempo stuff and the up tempo stuff. Yeah, I'm always trying to. I think as time goes on, I'm wanting to be a little bit more experimental, a little bit more left field, because that is kind of those are the strongest influences in terms of the kind of music that sort of, even from brass banding, avant-garde stuff. The name Jazz the Glass is almost a homage to Cabaret Voltaire, who are like one of my favorite bands of like the 80s. So and all of that was almost a precursor. Some of that music was like a real precursor to house music. And I know you're a bit of a Chicago house fan, but that early electronica stuff was what was influencing, people who then went on to, stuff like Planet Rock and, Afrika Bambaataa and Arthur Baker. They were probably listening to people like Cabaret Voltaire, who were doing this kind of very left field, I mean, it's kind of Kraftwerk, it's kind of DAF, it's kind of all of those 80s electronic bands. So there's that, the name is just is almost a reminder to me, and a kind of like, let's be a bit more underworld than we are Marshall Jefferson. Even though I'm a big fan of Marshall Jefferson, that's quite a commercial sound. Yeah. And some of my stuff is probably commercial because the samples I'm using are quite commercial, but in the back of my head, I'm thinking, come on, let's just be a little bit more challenging. Let's be a bit more interesting. Let's try and push some of this sound a little bit further.
It's a connection in music that's often not that well explored, but you're right, that kind of, there was a lot of music in the early 80s, new wave, that it would maybe fit with the idea of being indie, but also there was dance elements there was different rhythms being used, and also the samples that then people would use, like Kraftwerk. Yeah. Wouldn't expect when you came across them in bands like Afrika Bambaataa and the early hip hop.
Yeah. I mean, the Chicago house stuff, that came out of it was an attempt to make disco stuff heavier and kind of slightly more grimy and slightly more hardcore for a club audience. I mean, when the first single that I ever worked on, like it was way back in 1984, we were in a studio in Sheffield, and I marveled at this sampler that they just bought in at great expense, and I think the sample, and it could sample like 2 seconds. And that was like, in those days, that was incredible. You could take a David Bowie record and you could like try and lift off the sample sound, and you could use that as your backbeat. The technology, it's all about the technology as well. I mean, those technologies were then, that technology was then kind of drove a lot of the dance music that came after it,
I think all the references you mentioned is one of the reasons I like it so much. And I was thinking, it's almost like some of your songs you would listen to at the club and others you would listen to when you just got back from the club, that kind of distinction.
Yeah, I think that maybe it depends what kind of side I get out of the bed. Sometimes I'm a bit more introspective, but I'm a bit more, I don't know, I want to say, I loved bands like, Cocteau Twins, Dead Can Dance. They kind of had that sort of, bands like The Wake, even Joy Division, New Order. There was a kind of ethereal quality. I know there was a power in bands like Joy Division and also in the Cocteau Twins. But and people like Japan, David Sylvian. I suppose that's what and Massive Attack. That's what's in my head when I get back from the club and I'm writing the more down tempo kind of tracks that are a little bit more moody, and they're trying to take you somewhere emotionally. And the other stuff is probably trying to just batter you down a little bit. I mean, my hope is that if you hear one of my tracks in a club, it's slightly painful. As in, you're really getting the bass in your guts and you're thinking, God, this guy's, really messing with me here, or he's trying to.
And with that in mind, have you played them live, or is there a plan to do them either in clubs or to do them in another way?
I quite like to do some DJing at some point. I'm not quite sure how that would come to pass. I mean, I've got a lot of stuff that that I'm still keen to kind of put out there. But I would like to get back to, because when I also had an opportunity to, in the kind of early 90s, to do some recording in another studio back in Sheffield, where, you know, what they were doing was, you know, they were in the studio, and then they had their own cutting machine next to the studio, and then they would cut vinyl and they'd take it to the club, and then they'd play it and they'd see how it went, and then they came back and they'd alter their mix, you know, based on. And I really, you know, I used to DJ when I was at uni and a little bit after that, so I'd like to get back into DJing, but I don't know, it seems like the world has kind of moved on quite a bit, you know. I don't know. I don't know what I can imagine taking my 80s collection of vinyl and electronica to a club somewhere. The idea, I like the idea, but the practicalities and the reality of it and the energy that would require, I kind of feel I should, because that's what that beat stuff is designed for. And I guess I'd like to see that it works. I'd like to sit in a club and be thinking, okay, that tune does kind of what I thought it might do. That's all right. Or, do you know what? You kind of got to do some work on this. Isn't really kind of hitting the spot.
Because you get that immediate feedback that you perhaps can't get anywhere else.
Well, you don't, because I mean, I wonder whether anyone ever plays some of the more beat-driven stuff at the kind of volume it was designed to be played at. I mean, there's, I try as much as possible to attend to some of the bottom end, because let's face it, when you're in a club, what can you hear? Hi-hats and sub bass is pretty much what you're listening to a lot of the time, isn't it? Even on some of the better sound systems. So yeah, that's your question. I would love to. I don't know whether that's going to happen. I don't know that there's a way to kind of make that happen. But yeah, I like the idea. I like the immediacy, because I can see I'm working to this concept in my head of what clubbing looked like when I was clubbing, which is a good while ago. So
there's a fantastic DJ called Rebecca Vasmant who she plays jazz and hip hop. In fact, now many consider her as a jazz musician or a jazz DJ, but she, puts all these things in, and she goes and tries them out in clubs. And she is, because I've interviewed her, she said in the time she's been doing it, club audiences seem to be more receptive to a much wider range of what will be played, which I think is quite interesting itself.
Yeah, I think it's, I think it's a really good prod. It's something that I kind of think, like I said, I would like to do, because I think it kind of, I don't need to be there when people put their pods in and they're listening to the down tempo stuff, because I can do that of an evening. I'm thinking, well, hopefully this feels kind of quite chill. But the thumping stuff, when you're trying to EQ a bass and you're trying to get that power into it, you only really know what that sounds like when it's really kind of, it's really loud.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's next for you then? Are you still continuing to make new music and put it out there?
Yeah, I still post pretty much. I post every Friday, like a 60-second. I still do the 60-second thing. It's really worked for me. It's, there's some things that I've done that have been 60 seconds, and I'm thinking they will always be 60 seconds. I like them, but they're not going to be a 2 or 3 minute track. So I have a lot of that, and my plan is probably maybe to compile those into some kind of album. I'm not sure how they go down with other people. I mean, it's kind of a weird one in a way, Alistair, when I think about, our kind of attention span with music. Isn't there some stats out there about how many people actually finish a track on Spotify? It's like people are just like 10, 15, 20, 30 seconds, and then they've moved on. So part of me is kind of thinking, well, if I've written a track for a minute and I got your attention for a minute, I've done pretty well. So there's maybe an album's worth of stuff to come out later in the year, and I've got releases that are ready to go. So I'm kind of releasing stuff every 4 weeks or so.
I think that's a really interesting point, though, because I think there's almost this divergence that with the return of vinyl and people actually sitting, I know it's over exaggerated, I'm sure, the kind of vinyl is, but it's definitely been a thing. And the idea that people are sitting down and getting immersed in albums again is really interesting. But then you've got the opposite thing of people on a streaming service, just giving something, whatever it is, 10 seconds, and then, you know, listen to the beginning, fast forward, listen to the middle. Now that's not for me, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I mean, you know, maybe albums are. I mean, when I think about Shine, in a way, I'd like to think people listen to it from beginning to end.
Yeah.
I mean, they do or not, but I you know, maybe that, I hope that's kind of a kind of complete experience. And yet, on the other hand, maybe it says more about my attention span than it does about other people's. But I like the idea of keeping things fresh, because there have been times when I've worked on things and I polish them, and then they've lost that sense of joy that I had when I first kicked off with that.
I just thinking about that though, I think Shine would be quite an odd album not to listen to in that way, because some of the tracks are short and everything. It would almost be more disruptive to kind of flick your way through it than just say, it's a bit like, you know, some of my favorite ambient albums or whatever. There's some really short bits of music, but they all work together. So what you're doing is you're sitting there and you're listening to the whole.
Yeah, I mean, there are if you go to the Bandcamp page, there are actually more tracks in that album than I was able to put on the CD. Yeah. And yeah, it's hard to it was interesting talking to you, Alice. It's hard to kind of get a sense of how other people appreciate them or don't appreciate them. But it's not, obviously it's not a new thing. I mean, you know, people have been putting kind of shortened tracks on. I mean, maybe it's existed as long as there have been albums. It just felt like I wasn't looking to pad the album out, but I think I was looking to include them because I liked them, and I think they kind of were part of the story of the time when I was writing and recording Shine.
Well, David, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Alistair. And like I say, thanks for your support and for inviting me onto the show. It's been fun to talk to you.
And this is Jazz the Glass and Fire from the album Shine.